That's the word. Not love, not feelings, not even commitment. No, for avoidant men, it all begins and ends with risk. Welcome, and let's talk plainly about avoidant men. How do they communicate differently, and how to communicate with them? I'll explain it with stories, some honesty, and the quiet precision of a scalpel, not a hammer. Because if you've ever tried speaking with an avoidant man, you may have discovered it's like talking to someone who lives in a different country, one where the language isn't just unfamiliar, it's governed by entirely different laws. Let me tell you about a man named Charles. Charles was the kind of man who could give a boardroom speech without breaking a sweat, negotiate mergers like chess games, and recite risk assessments the way most of us recite a shopping list. But ask Charles what he feels about a relationship. He'd go stiff as a statue. His girlfriend once told him, "I just need to feel close to you." He blinked, utterly confused, and replied, "Define close. Proximity, emotional transparency, shared calendars." And she burst into tears. Now, Charles wasn't cruel. Quite the opposite. He bought her gifts, showed up when it counted, and remembered her coffee order down to the oat milk. But when she cried, he went silent. It wasn't that he didn't care, he just didn't understand the currency she was trading in. She spoke emotion, he spoke logistics, and neither had a translator. You see, avoidant men are not devoid of emotion. They're not sociopaths or heartless titans, but they are, to their core, risk managers. From the moment they wake to the moment they finally sleep, and poorly, I might add, they are tracking variables. Emotional ones included. They do not ask, "Do I love her?" They ask, "Is this wise?" They do not say, "I'm afraid of commitment." They say, "This commitment introduces variables I cannot yet quantify." And if you've ever tried to have a vulnerable heart-to-heart with one, you might have experienced the strange sensation of watching a man physically leave the room while still being in it. Because to him, vulnerability feels like handing over the nuclear launch codes. Imagine that. The world has never protected you, emotionally, physically, maybe even spiritually. You grew up learning that needs were burdens, trust was foolish, and safety a myth. And now someone says, "Just open up to me." It sounds absurd, like handing your raw nerves to someone holding a cheese grater. So how do they communicate? Well, precisely. They are surgical, strategic, measured. If they say they'll be somewhere, they are. If they promise something, they do it. But speak in riddles or emotional storms, and they shut down faster than a fuse box in a flood. Avoidant men use words for function, not for feeling. Their affection lies in actions. Fixing your flat tire, reading the contract you're afraid to sign, sitting beside you in silence because they know presence means more to you than chatter. And yet, here's the catch. Their silence is misread, their precision mistaken for disinterest. And so partners begin to push, to plead. "Tell me what you're feeling." That's like asking a cat to sing opera. It's not that it won't, it simply doesn't. And when you insist it must, all you do is scare it off. Let me offer another example. Liam, military man, trained in tactics, logistics, and discipline. One of my coaching clients. His wife used to storm into the room with a sea of emotional chaos. "You don't care about me. You don't love me like you used to." He'd go mute. Why? Because avoidant men don't respond to emotional accusations. They respond to measurable problems. One day, we reframed her statement. Instead of, "You never care," she said, "When we don't talk for 3 days, I feel lonely. Could we schedule 15 minutes each night to connect without phones?" He stared and said, "Yeah, that makes sense." Just like that, That's the language they speak. Specificity, not storms of always and never, but structure, intention, logic. Not because they are cold, but because they've lived their lives with emotions as landmines. And you don't run through a minefield. You step carefully, deliberately. So how do you communicate with them? You begin by abandoning the myth that feeling equals proof. You replace, "I feel like you don't love me," with, "I need 30 minutes of connection time each day to feel secure. Could we make that part of our rhythm?" You trade volume for clarity. You remove emotional grenades from your vocabulary. You don't care. You never try. You're just like my ex. And instead, offer translation. Here's what I need. Here's why it matters. Here's how we can do it. You define the variables so they can calculate the risk, and then say yes. Understand this. Avoidant men are not allergic to love. They're allergic to chaos disguised as intimacy. But if you give them a calm, structured invitation into connection, you'll see something remarkable. They lean in. They don't run from love. They run from confusion. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to become a safe harbor. Not by shrinking yourself or silencing your needs, but by communicating them in their language. Measurable, calm, respectful, director. And when they begin to trust that your words don't come with hidden barbs or unspoken contracts, then they will open. Slowly, awkwardly, but earnestly. One day, that man who used to shrug when asked, "What are you feeling?" may just turn to you, take your hand and say, "I didn't know this kind of peace existed until I met you." And that, my friends, is how you love an avoidant man. Not by prying open the vault, but by showing him there's no need to lock the door anymore.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.